She was the first person who ever believed in him, long before the fame, the red carpets, or the cameras. Now she's dying in a quiet hospice bed, asking for him by name. When Keanu Reeves walks into her room, what she says in her final moments changes everything he thought he knew about his own story. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Keanu stood at the kitchen counter of his Hollywood Hills home, sipping water after his morning run. The California sun streamed through wide windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. His phone buzzed on the counter, a missed call, now a voicemail, from a Toronto area code he didn't recognize. He tapped the notification, lifting the phone to his ear while taking another sip of water. "Hello, Mr. Reeves. My name is Anand Patel. I was an administrator at Glendale Middle School in Toronto during the 1980s. The voice was elderly but clear, with a slight Indian accent. I apologize for contacting you this way. I got your number from Patricia at your agency. We went to university together many years ago." Keanu set his glass down, attention sharpening at the mention of his old school. "I'm calling about Ms. Rita Norwood, your former drama teacher." The man paused, and something in that silence made Keanu's heart beat faster. "She's in hospice care now. Heart failure. The doctors say it's a matter of weeks, perhaps days. She's been asking for you, Rita." An image flashed in his mind. A tall woman with prematurely silver hair always twisted into a loose bun, eyes that crinkled at the corners when she laughed, a voice that could command a rowdy classroom with a single word. "She doesn't expect you to come, of course," Mr. Patel continued. "She knows how busy you must be, but I promised I would try to reach you. She's at Lakeside Hospice in Toronto, room 217. Another pause. "She made a difference to many of us, Mr. Reeves. I thought you should know." The message ended with Mr. Patel reciting his phone number, his voice trailing off uncertainly. Keanu stood motionless, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the voicemail had ended. "Ms. Norwood? Rita?" The first person who had ever looked at him, really looked at him and said, "There's something special here." He'd been 13, awkward and quiet, struggling to find his place in the world. His family had moved so many times by then that he'd developed a protective shell, a way of being present without being noticed. But somehow, Rita had seen through it immediately. "Still waters run deep," she'd told him after that first drama class, when he'd barely spoken 2 words. "You just need the right stage, Keanu." He hadn't seen her in over 30 years. After he'd left school, another sudden move, another new start, he'd written her a letter, a teenager's earnest attempt to express gratitude. But then, life had swept him forward, and the connection had faded into memory. And now she was dying. Keanu moved to his living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles. The city stretched out before him, hazy and vast in the morning light. His life was here now, scripts stacked on the coffee table, production meetings scheduled for the upcoming week, training sessions for his next role. But suddenly none of it seemed as important as room 217 at Lakeside Hospice. Without fully forming the decision, he reached for his laptop and began searching for the next available flight to Toronto. There was one leaving LAX in 4 hours. First class was available. He made the booking, then called his assistant. "Sandra, I need to clear my schedule for the next few days. Family emergency." It wasn't exactly true, but it wasn't exactly false either. Rita had been more family to him than some actual relatives. "The meeting with Paramount?" Sandra asked, her voice immediately shifting to concerned efficiency. "Reschedule, same with the training session and the table read. Tell everyone I'm sorry, but this can't wait." "Of course, is everything okay?" Keanu paused, looking at the confirmation email for his flight. "No," he said finally. "But I can still do something about it. I'll be on a plane to Toronto in a few hours. I'll call when I land." After hanging up, he stood for a moment in the center of his living room, feeling the weight of time. How much had passed? How little might remain? Then he moved quickly to his bedroom to pack, the decision bringing with it a clarity that cut through everything else. Some debts could never be fully repaid, but at the very least they deserved to be acknowledged. As he packed a simple bag, just enough for a few days, Keanu found himself remembering a moment from 7th grade. He'd been backstage before his first real performance, heart racing, mouth dry, convinced he was about to make a fool of himself in front of the entire school. Rita had appeared beside him, her presence calm and steady amidst the chaos of pre-show nerves. "I can't do this," he'd whispered, genuine panic rising in his chest. She'd placed a hand on his shoulder and looked directly into his eyes. "Don't act," she'd said simply. "Just tell the truth. The rest will follow." It had been the foundation of everything that came after, every role, every performance. Don't act. Tell the truth. And the truth now was that Rita Norwood was dying, and he needed to say goodbye. An hour later, Keanu locked his front door, overnight bag in hand. The Uber was already waiting in the driveway to take him to LAX. As he settled into the back seat, he checked his phone one more time. A text from Sandra, "Everything's rescheduled. Take the time you need." And a new email from Mr. Patel, responding to the message Keanu had sent confirming his visit. "She'll be so pleased. Safe travels." Keanu watched the familiar landmarks of Los Angeles slide past his window as the car made its way toward the airport. In less than 8 hours, he would be in Toronto, the city of his adolescence, to visit the teacher who had seen something in him before he'd seen it in himself. He just hoped he wasn't too late. The taxi pulled up to the curb in front of Glendale Middle School just after 10 a.m. Keanu paid the driver and stepped out into the crisp Toronto autumn air. He had landed late last night, checked into a hotel downtown, and slept fitfully, his dreams filled with fragments of memories from decades past. The school building stood much as he remembered it, a solid brick structure from the 1960s, 3 stories high with large windows and a flat roof. Maple trees lined the walkway leading to the main entrance, their leaves ablaze in shades of crimson and gold. The playground equipment had been updated and a new wing extended from the east side, but the heart of the building remained unchanged. Keanu stood for a moment on the sidewalk, hands in the pockets of his dark wool coat, taking it in. He hadn't planned to come here before visiting Rita at the hospice. The decision had formed somewhere over Michigan as he'd stared out the airplane window at the darkness below. He needed to walk these halls again, to reconnect with the memories before facing what was to come. He'd called ahead, and the current principal, a woman named Dr. Chen who sounded both efficient and kind, had agreed to meet him. "We're honored," she'd said, though Keanu had requested discretion. This wasn't a publicity stop. At the main entrance, he pressed the security buzzer. A camera whirred above the door, and moments later, a click indicated the door was unlocked. He pulled it open and stepped into the familiar scent of school, floor polish, paper, and the indefinable smell of hundreds of young people passing through the same space day after day. The main office was just to the right, exactly where it had been 35 years ago. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman looked up from her computer, her eyes widening slightly in recognition before professional composure took over. "Mr. Reeves," she said, standing. "Dr. Chen is expecting you. I'll let her know you're here." Dr. Chen emerged a moment later, a petite woman in her 40s with short black hair and glasses, dressed in a tailored blue suit. Her handshake was firm and her smile genuine. "Mr. Reeves, welcome back to Glendale. I'm Helen Chen. Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice," he replied. "And please, call me Keanu." She nodded, her expression becoming more solemn. "Mr. Patel called me yesterday. I'm so sorry about Ms. Norwood. She was still teaching here when I started as a math teacher 15 years ago. She's a legend in our district." "Is," Keanu corrected gently. "She is a legend." Dr. Chen's eyes softened. "Of course. Would you like a tour? The students are in class, so the halls are quiet." "I'd appreciate that." He paused. Could we start with the drama room? Absolutely. They walked through the quiet hallways, their footsteps echoing on the linoleum floors. Class was in session, and through the small windows in each door, Keanu caught glimpses of students bent over desks or gathered in discussion circles. They turned down the arts corridor, and Keanu felt a shift in his chest, a tightening, an anticipation. The familiar double doors appeared at the end of the hall, though the sign above them now read Media Arts Lab instead of Drama Studio. We've had to adapt with the times, Dr. Chen explained, noting his gaze on the sign. The drama program still exists, but it shares space with digital media arts now. Ms. Norwood fought the change tooth and nail until her retirement. She smiled at the memory. She only agreed when we promised that performance would remain central to the curriculum. She pushed open one of the double doors, holding it for Keanu to enter. The large room had indeed transformed. Computer stations lined the walls where once there had been only a few folding chairs. A green screen hung at one end, and high-tech lighting equipment occupied space where simple stage lights had been. But the small raised stage at the front of the room remained, its wooden boards worn smooth by decades of young performers. Keanu walked slowly to the center of the room, memories washing over him in waves. This was where it had all begun, in a very real sense, where Rita Norwood had looked at a shy, awkward boy and seen something no one else had bothered to look for. She gave the shyest kids the loudest roles, he said softly, almost to himself. Dr. Chen, standing respectfully near the door, nodded. She believed in challenging comfort zones. Growth happens at the edges, she always said. Keanu smiled. She used to tell me, still waters run deep, you just need the right stage. He walked to the edge of the small stage, running his hand along the worn wood. I stood here for the first time when I was 13, terrified, convinced I was going to throw up or pass out or both. What was the play? Dr. Chen asked. It wasn't a full play, a showcase of monologues and scenes. She gave me a piece from Hamlet. He shook his head, remembering. Way beyond my capabilities, or so I thought. Too many words, I told her, but she insisted I could do it. He stepped onto the stage, muscle memory guiding his feet to the exact spot where he'd stood all those years ago. The room seemed to shift around him, computers fading, replaced by the memory of folding chairs filled with parents and teachers, the weight of expectant eyes. I was standing right here, in the wings, about to go on, shaking. Rita came up behind me and whispered, "Don't act, just tell the truth." He looked out at the empty room, seeing it filled as it had been then. It changed everything. I walked out and just told the truth. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow. Dr. Chen remained quiet, honoring the moment. Eventually, Keanu stepped down from the stage. After that, I started staying late for drama club. It was the first place I'd ever felt like I belonged. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chen reached into her pocket and pulled out a small worn book. I thought you might want to have this. It was in Ms. Norwood's desk when she retired. The drama department was going to display it, but I think she would want you to have it. It was a copy of Shakespeare's Monologues for Young Men, its cover faded and pages well thumbed. When Keanu opened it, he saw notes in Rita's distinctive handwriting in the margins. And there, beside Hamlet's "to be or not to be" soliloquy, a simple annotation. K.R. Spring Showcase, 1984. She had remembered. All these years later, she had remembered. Keanu closed the book carefully, holding it as if it were made of something far more precious than paper and ink. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than before. As he left the school and headed back to the waiting taxi, Keanu tucked the book safely into his coat pocket. The weight of it against his chest felt right somehow, a tangible connection between past and present as he prepared to face what waited for him at Lakeside Hospice. Lakeside Hospice occupied a renovated Victorian mansion on the shores of Lake Ontario, its red brick exterior softened by climbing ivy, now turned russet with the change of seasons. Keanu stood for a moment on the wide front porch, gathering himself before pressing the intercom button. The taxi that had brought him from Glendale Middle School was already disappearing down the tree-lined drive. A gentle voice responded through the speaker. "Welcome to Lakeside. Please come in." The door unlocked with a soft click, and Keanu stepped into a foyer that managed to balance institutional efficiency with genuine warmth. Hardwood floors gleamed beneath area rugs in soft blues and greens. The walls, painted a calming cream, displayed local artwork, watercolors of the Toronto skyline, photographs of the lake in different seasons. A reception desk occupied one corner, staffed by a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a practical bob. "I'm here to see Rita Norwood," Keanu said, approaching the desk. "Room 217? Recognition flickered in the receptionist's eyes, but her professional demeanor remained intact. "Of course. If you'll just sign in here, I'll let the floor know you're coming up." She slid a visitor's log toward him. As Keanu signed his name, she discreetly picked up a phone. "Marcy? Ms. Norwood's guest has arrived." A pause. "Yes, that one." Another pause. "I understand. I'll send him right up." She replaced the receiver and turned back to Keanu with a smile. "Second floor. Turn right out of the elevator. The room numbers are clearly marked. Ms. Norwood's nurse will meet you there." The elevator was old but well maintained, its brass fixtures polished to a warm glow. As it creaked upward, Keanu found himself taking measured breaths, the way he did before difficult scenes. The small book of Shakespeare monologues pressed against his chest inside his coat pocket, a talisman of sorts. When the elevator doors opened on the second floor, a nurse was waiting. A woman, perhaps in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her scrubs were patterned with autumn leaves. "Mr. Reeves," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Marcy, Rita's primary nurse. Thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm and warm. "Rita's been having a good day, relatively speaking. She's been in and out of sleep, but she's lucid when she's awake." "How is she?" Keanu asked, the question encompassing far more than he could articulate. Marcy's expression softened with understanding. "Her heart is failing. The medications help with comfort, but they can't reverse the process." She began walking down the hallway, her quiet shoes making no sound on the carpeted floor. "She's physically frail, but her mind is still sharp as a tack. She corrected my grammar just this morning." They stopped outside a door marked 217. A small whiteboard hung beside it with Rita Norwood written in blue marker, alongside the names of her care team. "She knows you're coming," Marcy said. "Mr. Patel called her this morning." She hesitated, then added gently, "She may look different than you remember. The illness has taken a toll, but she's still very much herself." Keanu nodded, grateful for the preparation. "Thank you for taking care of her." "It's an honor," Marcy replied simply. "I'll give you privacy, but I'll be at the station down the hall if you need anything. There's a call button beside the bed." With that, she stepped away, leaving Keanu alone in the quiet hallway. He took one more deep breath, then knocked softly and opened the door. The room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, streaming through windows that overlooked the lake. It was a private room with space for a hospital bed, several comfortable chairs, and a small desk. Someone had placed a vase of late-season wildflowers on the bedside table. Their bright colors stood in stark contrast to the clinical equipment surrounding the bed: monitors, IV stands, the discreet coil of oxygen tubing. In the center of it all lay Rita Norwood. She looked smaller than he remembered, diminished by illness and age. Her once tall frame seemed to barely make an impression beneath the light blanket. Her silver hair, which she had always worn in a practical bun during his school days, now lay loose around her shoulders, thinner but still lustrous. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow but steady. For a moment, Keanu simply stood in the doorway, absorbing the reality before him. This was Rita, the woman who had commanded a classroom of rowdy teenagers with a single raised eyebrow, who had stayed hours after school to help students rehearse, whose passion for theater had ignited something similar in countless young people. He moved quietly to the chair beside her bed and sat down. Up close, he could see the map of wrinkles on her face, the translucent quality of her skin, the blue veins visible at her temples. She had always seemed ageless to his teenage self, neither young nor old, but simply and powerfully present. Now, the fragility of human existence was written clearly in every line of her body. "It's me," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's Keanu." For several heartbeats, nothing changed. Then, slowly, Rita's eyes fluttered open. The same clear gray he remembered, though now clouded slightly with age and medication. She blinked, focusing with what seemed to be an effort, her gaze finally settling on his face. A smile spread across her features, transforming her from frail patient back into the vibrant teacher of his memory. "Took you long enough, kid," she said, her voice raspy but still carrying the familiar undertone of gentle teasing. Keanu laughed, the sound catching slightly in his throat. "Traffic was terrible," he replied, falling easily into their old pattern of banter. Rita's smile widened. She lifted one hand, thin, blue-veined, but steady, and Keanu took it in both of his. Her skin felt paper-thin, but there was still strength in her grip. "You look good," she said, her eyes taking in his face with the same perceptive intensity he remembered. "The years have been kind to you." "I moisturize," he deadpanned, earning another smile. "Still got that dry wit." "Good." She shifted slightly, wincing with the effort. "They tell me you're some big shot in Hollywood now. Movies, fame, fortune. Don't believe everything you hear." "Oh, I don't." Her eyes twinkled. "I've seen your work. You're exactly who I thought you'd become." The simple statement hit Keanu with unexpected force. He swallowed hard, tightening his hold on her hand. "I brought something," he said, using his free hand to withdraw the book from his pocket. "Dr. Chen at Glendale gave it to me." Rita's eyes lit up with recognition. "My old prompt book. I wondered where that had gotten to." She released his hand to take the book, her fingers tracing the worn cover with evident affection. So many voices in these pages, so many students finding themselves through borrowed words. "You wrote notes about my first monologue," Keanu said. "Hamlet, Spring Showcase, 1984. "Of course I did. How could I forget?" she replied, her voice growing stronger with the memory. "You were so nervous backstage, remember?" "Like it was yesterday," Keanu admitted. "But you told me something I've never forgotten." "Don't act," they said together. "Just tell the truth." The afternoon light was beginning to soften as Keanu and Rita continued talking, their conversation flowing easily despite the decades that had passed since they'd last seen each other. She asked about his life in California, and he shared stories about his home, his motorcycles, his process for choosing roles. In turn, she told him about her years after he'd left Glendale, the hundreds of students she'd taught, the plays she'd directed, her retirement just 5 years earlier when her health had first begun to decline. "I should have kept in touch," Keanu said, regret coloring his voice. Rita waved away his apology with a thin hand. "Nonsense. You were busy becoming exactly who you were meant to be." She fixed him with the familiar teacher's gaze that had always seen straight through pretense. "No regrets in this room, young man. I won't allow it." "Still laying down the law, Miss Norwood?" "Someone has to," she smiled, though fatigue was beginning to show in the slight droop of her eyelids. "Would you mind?" she asked, gesturing toward a worn wooden box on the nightstand. "I've been sorting through things, deciding what goes where." Keanu reached for the box and placed it carefully on the bed beside her. It was clearly old, but well cared for, the wood polished to a soft glow by years of handling. "Most people leave organizing their affairs until the last minute," Rita said matter-of-factly as she opened the hinged lid. "I prefer to be methodical, always have been." Inside the box were various small treasures: photographs, programs from school plays, a collection of small tokens and mementos. Rita's hands moved through them with familiarity, each item clearly holding significance. "I've been a teacher for over 40 years, she continued. "Do you know what that means?" A lot of spelling tests to grade? She shot him a look that was pure Ms. Norwood, the one that had quelled classroom disruptions with a single glance. It means that my legacy isn't in things, it's in people, in lives touched, minds opened, spirits encouraged. Her hands moved through the box, lifting out small objects, a polished stone, a tiny cloth doll, a handmade bookmark. These are just anchors for the memories. As she spoke, she withdrew a folder from the bottom of the box. It was faded blue cardstock, its edges worn soft with handling. This is what I wanted to show you. She opened the folder to reveal a collection of letters and cards, organized with a teacher's precision. Letters from my students over the years. Not all of them, of course. There were thousands of children, but the ones who took the time to write after they left my classroom. Rita began to go through them, one by one, sharing brief snippets of the lives they represented. A thank you note from a girl who'd gone on to study theater at Juilliard, a wedding announcement from a boy who'd once been too shy to give a simple book report, a birth announcement for twins named after characters from Shakespeare, a postcard from Paris sent by a student who'd been inspired to travel after studying French literature in Rita's class. Each one a life in progress, Rita said softly, her fingers tracing the handwriting on a particularly colorful card. Each one carrying something forward that began in my classroom. Without looking up, Rita reached deeper into the folder and withdrew a single envelope. Unlike the others, which showed signs of frequent handling, this one appeared preserved, its edges still crisp, the paper still white despite its age. This one, she said, holding it carefully, has a special place. She handed it to Keanu. As soon as he saw the handwriting on the front, his own, from decades ago, awkward and trying too hard to be neat, recognition hit him like a physical force. "You kept it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course I did." It was the letter he'd written to her just before his family had moved away from Toronto, sometime in his 9th grade year. He'd left it in her school mailbox on his last day, too self-conscious to give it to her in person. "I've never opened it," Rita continued, watching his face closely. "Not in 35 years. Keanu looked up, surprised. "Why not?" A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Because you sealed it so carefully. Triple taped, if I recall correctly. It seemed wrong to break that seal without permission." She nodded toward the envelope in his hands. "I think perhaps it's time, though." With careful fingers, Keanu turned the envelope over. Sure enough, teenage him had secured the flap with multiple pieces of Scotch tape, as if the words inside were too precious or dangerous to risk escaping. He smiled faintly at the memory of that earnest boy, so full of big feelings and no vocabulary to express them. "May I?" he asked. At Rita's nod, he carefully began to work at the aged tape, trying not to tear the envelope. It came away in small pieces, the adhesive having dried out over the decades. Finally, the flap was free. He paused, suddenly nervous about what his younger self might have committed to paper. "Go on," Rita encouraged gently. "I've waited long enough, don't you think?" Keanu slid his finger under the flap and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded in thirds. He withdrew it and unfolded it carefully, revealing handwriting he barely recognized as his own. Larger than his current style, with more flourishes, clearly the penmanship of someone still figuring out his identity. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "Dear Ms. Norwood, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. That sounds dramatic, like I'm dying or something, but my mom says we're moving again, to Los Angeles this time. We leave tomorrow. I wanted to say thank you, but those words seemed too small. Before your class, I was invisible, not on purpose, but because it was easier that way. New schools, new people, all the time. It's simpler to be nobody. But you were the first adult who made me feel seen. Really seen, not just noticed. You said I had depth, that still waters run deep. No one ever said anything like that to me before. I don't know if I'll keep acting. My mom says there are lots of opportunities in LA, but I don't know." What I do know is that whatever happens, I'll remember what you taught me. To tell the truth, not just act. To listen before speaking. To find the meaning beneath the words. Maybe someday I'll come back and tell you what happened after we left, if I ever do anything worth talking about. Thank you for everything. Your student, Keanu Reeves. The room fell silent when he finished reading. Keanu stared at the paper in his hands, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Embarrassment at the dramatic earnestness of his teenage self, but also a deep tenderness toward that boy who had poured his heart onto the page. You were the first adult who made me feel seen, Rita repeated softly, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. That's what it was all about, wasn't it? That's what teaching should be. Keanu nodded, not trusting his voice. And look at you now, she continued, a note of wonder in her voice. All that potential I saw, all that depth beneath the surface, it's all come to fruition. More than I could have imagined. Because of you, Keanu said, finally finding his words. Everything started with you, Rita. Rita shook her head slightly at Keanu's words. No, I just recognized what was already there. She reached out to take his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You were the spark, Keanu. I was just the one lucky enough to witness the first light. She settled back against her pillows, her gaze drifting toward the window, where the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the lake. Tell me, do you ever think about paths not taken? The lives we might have lived if we'd made different choices at crucial moments? Sometimes, Keanu admitted. Doesn't everyone? I suppose they do. She adjusted her position slightly, wincing at the effort. I used to dream of being an actress myself, you know. Broadway, West End, the classics, that was the plan. She smoothed her hand over the folder of letters. Life had other ideas. A failed audition here, a financial setback there, and somehow decades passed while I was teaching, temporarily, until my big break came. Do you regret it? Keanu asked. Not pursuing acting professionally? I used to, Rita admitted, especially when I was younger. I'd see a magnificent performance on stage or screen and think, that could have been me. Her eyes returned to the folder. But then letters like these would arrive, and I'd realize something important. She fixed Keanu with that penetrating gaze that had always made her students feel simultaneously seen and challenged. People think you have to be loud to matter in this world. Center stage, spotlight, name in lights. But I've come to believe in the power of quiet influence, the kind that ripples outward in ways you might never witness firsthand. The impact that can't be quantified? Keanu nodded, understanding precisely what she meant. Exactly, Rita's eyes brightened. You always were quick on the uptake. She returned to the folder, pulling out another letter, this one on school district letterhead dated nearly 15 years earlier. Michael Braden, do you remember him? A few years behind you, I think. Keanu shook his head. The name doesn't sound familiar. He was one of those quiet, serious boys. Brilliant at script analysis, but terrified of performing. She handed him the letter, a thank you note from a teacher who had started a successful drama program for at-risk youth in Hamilton. He writes to me every Christmas, says he uses my lesson plans. Can you imagine? Things I scribbled down decades ago, still circulating in classrooms. That's an amazing legacy, Keanu said, studying the letter with genuine interest. And this one, Rita continued, finding another note. Sophia Chen. She's a single mother raising 3 children in Vancouver. Never became an actress, though she had genuine talent, but she writes that she recites Shakespeare to her children every night at bedtime. A wistful smile crossed Rita's face. Says it calms them like nothing else. Imagine that. The bard as a lullaby. One by one, Rita shared these glimpses into lives that had intersected with hers through the classroom. Students who had carried some piece. One by one, Rita shared these glimpses into lives that had intersected with hers through the classroom. Students who had carried some piece of her teaching into their adult lives, often in ways that had nothing to do with professional theater or film. Daniel became a pediatric surgeon, she said, showing Keanu a holiday card featuring a dark-skinned man with a brilliant smile. Says he uses character study techniques I taught him to understand his young patients better. Amanda runs a women's shelter in Montreal, uses theater exercises to help residents process trauma. Jason teaches physics at UBC, starts every semester with dramatic readings of scientific discoveries to engage his students. The folder seemed endless, each letter or card representing a life touched, a connection maintained across years and distance. Some had found their way into the arts, but many more had carried Rita's influence into fields as diverse as medicine, law, social work, and business. "It's extraordinary," Keanu said finally. "All these lives you've shaped." Rita closed the folder, her expression pensive. "It's strange how our lives rarely follow the scripts we write for ourselves, isn't it?" Her gaze returned to the window, where the setting sun was turning the lake to molten gold. "But I wouldn't change it now, even if I could. This quiet kind of influence, it's become more meaningful to me than any applause I might have received on stage." "You didn't need a stage," Keanu said softly. "You made others believe they deserved one." Something flickered in Rita's eyes, recognition, perhaps, of being truly seen herself. What a lovely way to put it. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle beep of monitoring equipment and the distant sound of a boat horn on the lake. Rita's eyelids had begun to droop, the emotional conversation clearly taking a toll on her limited energy. "I should let you rest," Keanu said, rising from his chair. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Rita asked, her voice fainter than it had been earlier. "Try to keep me away?" he replied with a gentle smile. "Good." Her eyes closed fully now. "There's more I want to tell you, more I want to hear about your life." "I'll be here," Keanu promised. "Get some rest, Rita." As he turned to leave, her voice came again, already drifting towards sleep. "Your movies? I've seen them all, you know, even the ones the critics panned." Keanu paused at the door, touched by this simple admission. "Even Johnny Mnemonic?" She murmured, a slight smile curving her lips, though her eyes remained closed. "You were still telling the truth, even when the material wasn't worthy of you." By the time Keanu quietly closed the door, Rita's breathing had deepened into sleep. He stood in the hallway for a moment, processing the afternoon's conversation, the unexpected weight of discovery that his teenage letter had been preserved for decades, the evidence of Rita's far-reaching influence through generations of students. Marcy appeared from the nurse's station, clipboard in hand. "She's asleep?" Keanu nodded. She seemed tired at the end. "It's been her best day in weeks," Marcy said with a meaningful look. "Your visit gave her a boost." "Will you be back tomorrow?" "Absolutely. Maybe around 10? "Perfect. She's usually most alert in the mornings." As Keanu walked toward the elevator, he felt a curious lightness despite the emotional intensity of the visit. Seeing the tangible evidence of Rita's legacy, not in accolades or achievements, but in lives touched and directions altered, had shifted something in his understanding of influence and significance. The quiet kind of impact. The ripples that continue long after the initial stone has disappeared beneath the water. The bridges built that others cross without ever knowing the builder's name. These were Rita's true monuments, and in his own way, through his work and life, perhaps Keanu was building similar bridges, ones whose travelers might never know who had made their crossing possible. The following morning dawned clear and bright, autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of Keanu's hotel room. He'd slept better than expected, perhaps due to the emotional release of reconnecting with Rita after so many years. Over breakfast, he found himself thinking about their conversation, about paths not taken, about the quiet kinds of influence that shape lives without fanfare or recognition. He had brought Rita's book of Shakespeare monologues with him from Los Angeles, wanting to return it to her after Dr. Chen had given it to him. But now, sitting with his coffee, he felt compelled to do more. On impulse, he called a nearby bookstore, confirming they had what he was looking for. A quick detour on his way to the hospice would be worthwhile. When Keanu arrived at Lakeside Hospice just after 10, he carried a small paper bag along with Rita's original book. Marcy greeted him warmly at the nurse's station. "She's having a good morning," the nurse informed him. "Had some toast and tea for breakfast, and she's been looking at photo albums. I think she's been waiting for you." "Thanks for taking such good care of her," Keanu said. Marcy's expression softened. "It's an honor. Patients like Rita make our work meaningful. She never complains, always says please and thank you, and has us all using proper grammar whether we want to or not." She laughed lightly at this last part. "Habits of a lifetime, teacher, I suppose." Keanu nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Rita's standards for clear communication had been exacting but delivered with such genuine care that students had risen to meet them willingly. When he knocked and entered room 2017, he found Rita sitting up in bed, looking more alert than she had the previous afternoon. Someone, probably Marcy, had helped her arrange her silver hair in a simple braid, and she wore a deep green bed jacket that brought out the clear gray of her eyes. A photo album lay open on her lap. "There he is," she said with evident pleasure. "Right on time. Promptness was always a strength of yours, even as a teenager." "Unlike some of my other classmates," Keanu replied with a smile, settling into the chair beside her bed. "I seem to remember Kevin Matthews consistently arriving 15 minutes late to rehearsals." 20 minutes, Rita corrected, and always with the same excuse about his locker jamming. Her eyes twinkled with the shared memory. "I started telling him call times were 20 minutes earlier than they actually were. He never caught on." They laughed together, the decades between them momentarily disappearing in the warmth of reminiscence. Rita gestured to the photo album on her lap. "I've been looking at old production photos this morning. Glendale Spring Showcase 1984. Your first performance." She turned the album so Keanu could see the black and white photographs carefully arranged on the page. There he was at 13, gangly, serious, with dark hair falling into his eyes, standing center stage in the pool of a single spotlight. The costume had been simple: dark pants, white shirt, a borrowed suit jacket too large for his adolescent frame. "I was terrified," he said softly, studying his younger self. "But it never showed," Rita replied. "That was what impressed me most. The fear was there, I could see it backstage, but once you stepped into the light, you transformed. Not into someone else, but into a more concentrated version of yourself." Keanu studied the other photographs, group shots of the entire cast, candid images of backstage preparations, Rita herself directing with characteristic intensity, her silver hair pulled back in its customary bun, her hands making a framing gesture as she guided a student through blocking. "You kept all these," he observed. "Documentation was important to me," Rita said, "not for vanity's sake, but as a record of growth. So many students came back years later wanting to see themselves as they had been, to remember that moment when they first discovered their voice." She turned another page in the album, revealing more images from different productions. A musical from the late 80s, a student-written play from the early 90s, a Shakespeare festival from the early 2000s. Decades of young faces, all caught in that peculiar mixture of terror and exhilaration that comes with live performance. "I remember my first real role, that monologue from Hamlet," Keanu said, returning to the initial photographs. "You had stayed late every evening to help me rehearse." "You were hesitant at first," Rita recalled, said the language was too difficult, too removed from how you actually spoke. "I didn't understand half of it," Keanu admitted with a small laugh. "All those these and thous, the inversions of normal speech patterns, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. I had no idea what that really meant at 13. "But you found your way into it," Rita said. "Not through the words initially, but through the feeling underneath them, the questioning, the deep uncertainty, the weighing of impossible choices. You helped me see past the language to the humanity beneath it," Keanu acknowledged. "That's what I've tried to do with every role since, find the truth, the real person experiencing those emotions, making those choices." Rita nodded, pleased by his understanding. "That's why your work resonates with people. It's never just performance. It's a kind of truth-telling through borrowed circumstances. She closed the photo album and set it aside, her movements slow but deliberate. "I had a recurring dream while I was still teaching," she said, her tone becoming more reflective. "In it, I would return to an auditorium years after a performance, and somehow the words spoken on that stage would still be hanging in the air, invisible but present, continuing to exist long after the speakers had gone." Keanu considered this. "Like ripples," he suggested, "continuing outward even when the initial stone has disappeared beneath the water." "Precisely." Rita's eyes brightened at his understanding. "Words have lives beyond their utterance. They change us, shape us, become part of who we are." Keanu reached for the paper bag he'd brought. "Speaking of words, I brought something." He withdrew a brand new edition of the complete works of Shakespeare, bound in soft leather. "I thought maybe, if you'd like, I could read to you sometime." "I'd like that very much," Rita said, touching the book with evident appreciation. "What would you choose?" Without hesitation, Keanu replied, "Hamlet's soliloquy, where it all began for me." Rita's face lit up. "Yes, perfect." Keanu opened the book to the passage he'd already marked with a ribbon. The familiar words he'd first encountered in her classroom more than 30 years earlier. He stood, moved by some instinct, to give the words the respect of a proper recitation. "Should I?" He gestured toward the center of the room. "Please," Rita encouraged. For a moment, Keanu stood quietly, centering himself as Rita had taught him long ago, feet grounded, breath steady, mind clear. Then he began. "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them." His voice, deeper and more resonant than it had been at 13, filled the quiet room. The words came back to him as if no time had passed at all. Muscle memory, emotional memory, the poem's rhythm finding its natural cadence in his speech. He didn't rush, he allowed the language its proper weight, each phrase given the space it required. When he glanced at Rita, he saw that she had closed her eyes, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she listened. Her hand rested lightly on her blanket, fingers moving slightly with the meter of the verse, as if conducting a silent orchestra. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment, with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. As he finished, the room fell silent save for the gentle beep of monitoring equipment and the distant murmur of voices in the hallway. Rita's eyes remained closed for several heartbeats, savoring the lingering resonance of the words. When she finally looked at him, there were tears shining in her gray eyes. "Still waters," she whispered. "Still waters." Keanu returned to his chair beside her, feeling strangely lightened, as if the recitation had released something he'd been carrying without realizing its weight. "I knew you'd remember," Rita said softly. "It's in your bones now, that language. It shaped you, even if you don't perform it anymore." "I haven't done Shakespeare since school," Keanu admitted. "But you're right, it's still there, underneath everything else." Rita nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd long suspected. That's what education should do, not just fill minds with facts and figures, but shape the very instrument that will play life's music. The rain arrived that afternoon, pattering against the windows of room 217 with gentle persistence. It cast the lake in muted silvers and grays, creating a cocoon-like atmosphere that seemed to invite confidences. After Keanu's recitation of Hamlet's soliloquy, Rita had needed to rest. He'd left for a few hours, returning in the late afternoon with takeout soup from a deli she'd mentioned as a favorite during their earlier conversations. "You remembered," she said, pleased as he arranged the container on her tray table. "Gino's Minestrone. I used to stop there every Friday after classes." "Their bread is still amazing too," Keanu added, placing a small wrapped loaf beside the soup. They ate together as the rain continued its steady rhythm against the glass. Rita managed only a small portion, but she clearly enjoyed it, commenting on how some recipes become touchstones, familiar tastes that connect us to specific times and places in our lives. After they'd finished and Keanu had cleared away the containers, Rita's expression grew more contemplative. She looked out at the rain-washed landscape for a long moment before turning back to him. "There's something that's been on my mind," she said. "Something I've been thinking about more often as time grows shorter." Keanu settled into the chair beside her bed, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." "Do you remember a student named Darius Williams?" she asked. "He would have been a few years behind you, probably started at Glendale right around when you left." Keanu searched his memory but shook his head. "I don't think so. The name doesn't sound familiar." "I didn't think you'd know him," Rita acknowledged. "But his story has been on my mind lately." She gazed toward the rain-streaked window. Darius was exceptional. The kind of natural talent that comes along maybe once in a teaching career. He walked into my classroom as a shy 7th grader and within weeks was delivering performances that left the room breathless. As she spoke, her voice grew stronger, animated by the memory. He had what good actors are made of, that rare combination of technical ability and emotional intelligence. He could read a scene once and understand every nuance, every unspoken motivation. "It sounds remarkable," Keanu said. "Was?" Rita's expression clouded. "But his home life was troubled. Father gone, mother working multiple jobs, older brother in and out of juvenile detention. Darius was trying to hold everything together, be the responsible one." She paused, gathering herself. "In 9th grade, his attendance became spotty. Then he stopped coming altogether. I tried to reach out, called home, even drove to his apartment once, but the family had moved, no forwarding address. He just vanished." The pain in her voice was evident, still fresh despite the passing years. "I failed him, Keanu. I saw his gift, his potential, but I couldn't find a way to help him nurture it when life got in the way." "You can't blame yourself for that," Keanu said gently. "There are limits to what any teacher can do." "Perhaps," Rita conceded. "But he's one of the ones I've thought about most over the years. The student who left too soon." She turned her gaze fully to Keanu, her eyes suddenly intense. There were others like him, of course. Children with extraordinary gifts but challenging circumstances. Some found their way, some didn't. She reached for Keanu's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "I've wondered sometimes if it was worth it. All the effort, all the care, knowing there would always be those who slipped through the cracks, despite my best intentions." The vulnerability in her admission struck Keanu deeply. This woman, who had always seemed so certain in his memory, was sharing her doubts, her perceived failures. "Was it worth it?" Keanu echoed, leaning forward slightly. "Teaching instead of pursuing acting, investing in students who sometimes disappeared from your life without warning?" Rita nodded, her eyes on the rain-spattered window. "Yes, that's what I'm asking." Keanu considered his words carefully. "I think that's a question every person asks about the path they've chosen, especially near the end." He gestured to the folder of letters that still sat on her bedside table. "But from where I'm sitting, the evidence speaks for itself." "Evidence can be selective," Rita countered. "Those are just the students who stayed in touch, who found some success, who remembered to write. What about the others, the Dariuses of the world?" "You don't know what seeds you planted that might have bloomed later," Keanu said gently. "Just because you didn't get to see the growth doesn't mean it didn't happen." She seemed to consider this, her fingers playing absently with the edge of her blanket. "I suppose that's true." She looked up at him with sudden directness. "What about you? Any regrets in your path?" The question caught him off guard. "Professionally, some roles I wish I'd approached differently. Some opportunities I missed. And personally?" Keanu was silent for a moment, unaccustomed to discussing his private life so openly. But something about Rita's gaze, the same penetrating look that had seen through his teenage defenses, made ordinary barriers seem unnecessary. "I've had my share of losses," he said finally. "People I couldn't save, relationships that ended, mistakes I can't undo." He paused. "But regret isn't quite the right word. It's more an awareness of life's imperfections, of our limitations as human beings." Rita nodded slowly. "Well put." She was quiet for a moment, then asked with characteristic directness, "Would you do me a favor, Keanu?" "Of course. Find out what happened to Darius." Her eyes held his, unwavering. Darius Williams. He'd be in his late 40s now. Last known address was in Scarborough, East Toronto. Keanu felt the weight of this request. "Rita, that was over 30 years ago. He could be anywhere." "I know it's a long shot," she admitted, "but you have resources I don't, people who can find people." She smiled faintly. "I've seen your movies. I know how these things work." Despite the gravity of the conversation, Keanu couldn't help but laugh. Real life isn't quite like the movies. "No," Rita agreed. "It's messier, more complicated, but also more meaningful." Her expression grew serious again. "I don't expect miracles, but I would like to know before I go." The simple honesty of her request, this last wish of a dying teacher to know what became of a student who had haunted her thoughts for decades, touched something deep in Keanu's heart. "I'll try," he promised. "I have people who can look into it." "Thank you." The tension in Rita's face eased slightly. "Every second," she said, so softly he almost didn't hear it. "What?" "You asked if it was worth it." "Every second," she repeated more clearly. "The failures, the disappointments, the students who disappeared. They're all part of it, the whole messy, glorious endeavor." Her eyes met his, bright with sudden conviction. "I'd do it all again, every moment." The rain had stopped by early evening, leaving the world outside washed clean, the lake gleaming under clearing skies. Keanu had stepped out briefly to make some calls about finding Darius Williams, putting his production company's researchers on the task with instructions to treat it as a priority. When he returned to room 217, he found Rita dozing lightly, a copy of Jane Austen's Persuasion open on her lap. Not wanting to disturb her, he settled quietly into the chair by the window. From here, he could see the last rays of sunset gilding the surface of Lake Ontario, turning the water to hammered gold. The peace of the moment, this stillness between day and night, seemed appropriate somehow, a reflection of where Rita stood in her own journey. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It opened gently to reveal a young woman in hospital scrubs, not Marcy, but someone new. She was perhaps in her late 20s, with warm brown skin, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. She carried a medical chart and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to not disturbing patients. When she saw Keanu, she froze momentarily, eyes widening in recognition. Then, with visible effort, she composed her expression into professional neutrality. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't realize Aunt Rita had a visitor. I can come back later." "Aunt Rita?" Keanu repeated, rising from his chair. The young woman nodded. "I'm Layla Patel, her grandniece. I work as a nurse at Toronto General, but I stop by when I can." She glanced at the sleeping figure in the bed. "How is she today?" "Good moments and tired ones," Keanu replied. "We had soup from Gino's for lunch and talked quite a bit this afternoon." Layla smiled, genuine warmth replacing her earlier surprise. "Gino's minestrone? That was smart of you. It's been her favorite forever." She set the chart down on the small desk by the door. "I'm sorry if this seems strange, but you're Keanu Reeves, aren't you?" "I am," he confirmed. "Your great-aunt was my drama teacher at Glendale Middle School." "I know," Layla said, then caught herself. "I mean, she's mentioned you over the years. She keeps track of her former students, especially the ones who found success in the arts." At that moment, Rita stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She took in the scene before her, Keanu and Leela standing near the door, and smiled. "My two favorite people in one room," she said, her voice a little rough from sleep. "What a lovely surprise." "Hi, Auntie," Leila said, crossing to kiss Rita's cheek. "I wasn't sure you'd be awake. How are you feeling?" "Like an old woman who's had too much excitement for one day," Rita replied with a touch of her characteristic dry humor. "But the good kind of exhaustion. Soul-filling rather than soul-depleting." Leila checked the monitors beside the bed with a professional eye, then adjusted Rita's pillows with practiced ease. "Your readings look stable. Dr. Collins was pleased with your oxygen levels this morning." "Doctors are easily impressed," Rita said dismissively, though her tone was affectionate. "Leila, have you properly met Keanu? He was one of my most promising students back at Glendale." "We were just introducing ourselves when you woke up," Leila said. She turned to Keanu with a smile. "It's wonderful to meet you. Aunt Rita has told me stories about her teaching days for as long as I can remember." "All good, I hope," Keanu said, returning to his seat beside the bed. "Mostly," Leila laughed. "Though there was that time you nearly set fire to the stage curtains during Tech Week for our town." Keanu winced. "I'd hoped that incident was forgotten. It was an accident. The lighting board was ancient, and I hit the wrong switch." "Teachers never forget," Rita said with satisfaction. "Especially the near disasters." The three of them fell into easy conversation, Leila sharing updates about her work at Toronto General, Keanu relating stories from his most recent film shoot, Rita alternating between proud comments about her grandniece's accomplishments and sharp observations that kept them both laughing. After a while, Leila excused herself briefly to get coffee from the lounge down the hall. When she returned, she carried not just coffee, but a worn leather messenger bag. "I almost forgot," she said, setting her coffee aside and opening the bag. "I brought something to show you, Aunt Rita. I found it last week while cleaning out Mom's old storage boxes." She withdrew what appeared to be a theater program protected in a clear plastic sleeve. "Look what turned up after all these years." Rita took the item, her eyes widening in recognition. "Glendale Middle School Spring Showcase 1982? She looked up at Leila with delight. "Where on earth did your mother get this?" She would have been just a teenager herself then. "Mom went to Northern Secondary but had friends at Glendale," Leila explained. "She must have gone to see the showcase. I thought you might like to have it. It's in amazing condition." "May I?" Keanu asked, curious about this artifact from just before his time at the school. Rita handed it to him, and he carefully slid the program from its protective sleeve. It was a simple production, just a few folded sheets of cardstock with the names of performances, student actors, and acknowledgments. As he leafed through the pages, he found himself transported back to the world of middle school theater productions. The earnestness, the ambition, the sense of momentous occasion that such events held for young performers. "This is wonderful," he said, returning it to its sleeve. "A piece of Glendale history." Leila hesitated, then asked, Would you mind signing it?" "Not for me," she added quickly. "For Aunt Rita. I thought I could frame it for her room." The request was so simple, so genuine, that Keanu felt unexpectedly moved. "I'd be happy to," he said, reaching for the pen Leila offered. "Don't be ridiculous," Rita protested, though her eyes betrayed her pleasure at the suggestion. "Keanu isn't even in that program. He came to Glendale the following year." "All the more reason this signature would be special," Leila countered. Connecting past and present. Keanu opened the sleeve again and found a blank space on the program's inside cover. There he wrote a brief note. "To Rita, who taught me that still waters run deep. With endless gratitude, Keanu." He added the current date beneath his signature. As he returned the program to Rita, their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding. This small artifact, a relic from her teaching days, now bearing witness to their reconnection decades later, seemed to encapsulate something essential about their journey. "Thank you," Rita said softly, her fingers tracing his handwriting. "This is a treasure." "Speaking of treasures," Leila said, glancing at her watch, "I brought something else as well." She reached into her bag again and withdrew several dog-eared scripts. I thought we might continue our reading tradition tonight, Aunt Rita, but with an addition to our cast." She looked hopefully at Keanu. "Would you join us?" "Reading tradition?" Keanu inquired, looking between Rita and Leela with interest. Layla nodded as she arranged the scripts on the foot of Rita's bed. "Since Aunt Rita's been here, I've been reading plays with her a few evenings a week. Her doctor says it's excellent cognitive exercise, but really?" She smiled at her great-aunt. "It's just something we both love." "I'd be honored to join you," Keanu said, genuinely pleased by the invitation. It felt right somehow, sharing this fundamental activity that had first connected him to Rita decades earlier. "Excellent," Rita said, her energy visibly renewed by the prospect. "Leela, what have you brought us tonight?" "Options," Layla replied, spreading out the scripts. "Our Town, The Glass Menagerie, A Raisin in the Sun, and Fences. I thought our guest might have a preference." "Our Town holds a special place for me," Keanu admitted. "One of the first plays that made me understand theater isn't just entertainment, but a way of seeing life more clearly." "Thornton Wilder it is," Rita decided. "Act 2, I think, the wedding scene. It's been on my mind lately, that beautiful exploration of ordinary moments and their extraordinary significance." They arranged themselves accordingly, Leela and Keanu sitting on either side of Rita's bed, scripts open, the soft lamplight creating a gentle glow around them. There was a moment of anticipatory silence, that familiar pause before a reading begins, when possibility hangs in the air. "Who's playing whom?" Leela asked, ready to distribute parts. "Keanu should be George," Rita decided without hesitation. "You can be Emily, and I'll read the stage manager. The omniscient narrator suits my current perspective." Then Rita began, her voice taking on a different quality as she inhabited the stage manager's role, stronger, more resonant, with the measured cadence of a storyteller. 3 years have gone by. Yes, 3 years have gone by between Act 1 and Act 2. The sun's come up over 1,000 times. Summers and winters have cracked the mountains a little bit more, and the leaves have rustled by the windows of 1,000 houses. The familiar opening of Act 2 filled the small room, transforming it from a hospice space into something else entirely, a theater of the imagination, where the simple power of words created an entire world. As they read, Keanu found himself drawn into the rhythm of the dialogue, the poignant simplicity of Wilder's language evoking the small New Hampshire town and its inhabitants with vivid clarity. When they reached the scene where George and Emily meet on the morning of their wedding, something remarkable happened. The years of professional experience fell away from Keanu, and he found himself reading not as a polished actor, but as a student again, present, open, truly listening to his scene partners rather than performing. "I don't want to be married," Leela read as Emily, capturing the character's pre-wedding nerves with touching vulnerability. "Emily, why are you mad at me?" Keanu responded as George, his voice stripped of artifice. "I'm not mad at you," Layla continued. "I never said I was mad at you, did I? It's just, you're perfect. You're just perfect." The simple honesty of the exchange, two young people on the brink of a life together, vulnerable and hopeful and terrified, filled the room with a quiet intensity. Keanu glanced up from his script to find Rita watching them both, her eyes bright with emotion and professional assessment. As they neared the end of the act, something unexpected happened. Rita, who had been reading the stage manager's lines with increasing vigor, suddenly joined in with several townspeople's dialogue from memory, no script needed. Her voice changed, taking on the character of Mrs. Soames. As they neared the end of the act, something unexpected happened. Rita, who had been reading the stage manager's lines with increasing vigor, suddenly joined in with several townspeople's dialogue from memory, no script needed. Her voice changed, taking on the character of Mrs. Soames, one of the wedding guests, and perfectly pitched. It was as if a consummate actor had suddenly stepped onto the stage, transforming what had been a simple reading into something more vibrant and alive. Keanu and Leela exchanged a quick glance of surprised delight before continuing, adjusting naturally to Rita's unexpected participation. For the next few minutes, Rita moved between characters effortlessly, giving voice to multiple townspeople at the wedding, her eyes closed as if seeing the scene unfold behind her eyelids, decades of theatrical training evident in every inflection and pause. When they finally reached the end of the act, there was a moment of reverent silence in the room. Then Leela burst into spontaneous applause. "Aunt Rita, that was incredible!" Rita opened her eyes, seeming almost surprised to find herself back in her hospice room. "Was it? I suppose I got carried away." But there was a pleased flush on her cheeks, a brightness in her eyes that transcended her physical fragility. "You're a font of hidden talents, Ms. Norwood," Keanu said, genuine admiration in his voice. "I had no idea you were such a formidable actor yourself." "Oh, I dabbled in my youth," Rita said with studied nonchalance, though her smile betrayed her pleasure at the compliment. "Community theater, summer stock, the occasional university production." She waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing worth mentioning." "Are you kidding?" Layla turned to Keanu. "She understudied for the Stratford Festival in the 70s, played Gertrude in Hamlet when the lead got laryngitis. The reviews were spectacular." "Ancient history," Rita insisted, though she didn't contradict the facts. "Why didn't you continue?" Keanu asked, genuinely curious. A shadow passed briefly across Rita's face. "Life intervened, choices were made." She paused, then added with characteristic directness, "I fell in love with a high school English teacher who couldn't imagine leaving Toronto, and I couldn't imagine leaving him." Her expression softened with memory. "Gerald Norwood, the kindest, most thoughtful man I've ever known. We had 32 wonderful years together before cancer took him. I never knew my great-uncle," Leela explained to Keanu. "He passed before I was born, but every family gathering included at least 3 Gerald stories. He sounds like he was quite a character." "That he was brilliantly witty," Rita agreed. "Brilliant mind, terrible fashion sense, and a laugh you could hear from 3 blocks away." She smiled at the memory. "He's the one who encouraged me to try teaching when a temporary position opened at his school. 'Just until your next acting job,' he said, but from the first day in the classroom, I knew I'd found my true stage." This glimpse into Rita's personal history, the road not taken, the love that had redirected her path, added new dimensions to Keanu's understanding of his former teacher. He found himself wondering what his own life might have looked like if he'd made different choices at crucial junctures. "Shall we continue with the glass menagerie?" Layla suggested, sensing the shift in mood and deftly steering them back to the evening's purpose. "Or would you prefer something else, Aunt Rita?" Rita considered for a moment. "Actually, I'm feeling rather energetic tonight. What about fences? Something with a bit more fire." "August Wilson it is," Layla agreed, distributing the new scripts. For the next hour they read selected scenes from Wilson's powerful drama. The language was muscular and poetic, demanding emotional honesty from its readers. Rita, despite her physical frailty, brought remarkable strength to her reading of Rose, her voice carrying the weight of a woman who had endured much and still stood tall. Keanu took on the challenging role of Troy Maxson, finding unexpected resonances with the character's complexity. Layla read multiple supporting roles, adjusting her voice and demeanor for each, with impressive versatility for someone without formal training. As they reached the powerful confrontation scene in Act 2, Rita's interpretation grew even more nuanced, finding the dignity in Rose's pain, the steel beneath her forbearance. When she delivered Rose's famous speech about standing in the same place for 18 years, her voice rang with such authentic emotion that the hospice room seemed to fall away entirely. When they finally set the scripts aside, all 3 were quiet for a moment, still held in the spell of the powerful words they'd shared. "You always did have a gift for finding the heart of a character," Keanu said finally, breaking the silence. "Even back when you were teaching us Shakespeare." Rita smiled, though fatigue was beginning to show in the slight droop of her eyelids. "That's the secret, isn't it? Finding the humanity beneath the poetry, the universal truth in specific circumstances." "You make it sound so simple," Layla said, gathering the scripts into a neat pile. The principles are simple, Rita replied. The execution is where the art lies. She turned to Keanu, her gaze direct and penetrating despite her evident tiredness. You always had the soul of a listener, Keanu. That's what made you powerful even as a young actor. You didn't just wait for your cue, you heard what was being said to you, truly heard it. As their evening of readings concluded, Rita's fatigue became increasingly evident. Though her spirit remained vibrant, her physical reserves were clearly depleted by the extended engagement with the plays. Marcy appeared at the door, gently but firmly announcing it was time for medication and rest. The tyranny of medical schedules, Rita sighed, though she didn't protest when Marcy began preparing her evening medications. Layla, dear, would you mind coming back tomorrow evening? Perhaps we could read The Importance of Being Earnest. I've always thought Keanu would make an excellent Jack Worthing. Of course, Auntie, Layla agreed, gathering the scripts and returning them to her bag. She kissed Rita's cheek. Get some rest. I'll bring dinner again. Maybe that pasta you like from Bellini's? Perfect, Rita said, squeezing her grandniece's hand. Keanu also prepared to leave, promising to return the following day. As Marcy assisted Rita with her medications, Leela and Keanu walked together down the hallway toward the elevator. Thank you for joining our reading tonight, Layla said. It meant the world to her. I haven't seen her that engaged in weeks. The pleasure was mine, Keanu replied sincerely. Your aunt is just as remarkable as she was when I was her student, perhaps even more so now. Layla nodded, her expression thoughtful. The hospice staff says she's one of their most extraordinary patients. Even as her body fails, her mind and spirit remain so vibrant. She hesitated, then added more quietly. Though they also say we shouldn't expect much more time. Days, maybe weeks. Keanu absorbed this information with a heaviness in his chest. Though he had known the situation was grave from the beginning, hearing it stated so directly made Rita's condition more starkly real. I'm grateful I got here in time, he said simply. So is she, Layla assured him, more than you probably realize. They reached the elevator and Leela pressed the call button. Marcy told me something I thought you might want to know, she continued. Something Aunt Rita mentioned to her. What's that? She told Marcy about a time when you were in school, an audition that you missed because you stayed behind to help another student rehearse. Layla's expression was earnest. Apparently it was a district-wide drama competition and you were certain to be selected, but you chose to help a struggling classmate instead. Keanu stared at her, genuinely taken aback. An audition I missed? He repeated, searching his memory. For a district-wide drama competition, Layla confirmed. Aunt Rita said you were a shoo-in to be selected, but another student, a girl, was struggling with her monologue. You stayed to help her instead of going to your own audition. The memory surfaced slowly, as if emerging from deep water. Samantha Chen, Keanu said quietly. She was terrified of public speaking, but needed a drama credit to graduate. Rita had given her a monologue from The Miracle Worker. That sounds right, Layla encouraged, as the elevator doors opened. I didn't think anyone noticed, Keanu continued, stepping into the elevator with Leela. It was after school. Most people had already left. Samantha was in tears, convinced she was going to fail. The audition was across town, and I realized I couldn't make it in time anyway, so he shrugged. I stayed. Worked through the piece with her until she felt confident enough to perform it. Aunt Rita noticed, Layla said softly as the elevator descended. She told Marcy she was in her office and overheard the whole thing, said that's when she knew. You were already someone the world needed. The forgotten compliment, delivered now, decades later, through Layla's gentle retelling, struck Keanu with unexpected force. That Rita had witnessed that small act of kindness and recognized something meaningful in it, that she had carried the memory all these years, that she had shared it with Marcy recently as she reflected on her life and legacy, it all wove together into a moment of profound connection across time. I had no idea, he said finally as they reached the lobby. It was such a small thing. That's often where character reveals itself most clearly, Layla observed, in the small choices we make when we think no one's watching. They paused at the main entrance, where the night air was cool and clear after the earlier rain. "Will you be all right getting back to your hotel?" Layla asked. "Yes, I'll call a taxi," Keanu assured her. "Same time tomorrow?" "I'll be here around 7 with dinner and more scripts," she confirmed. "And Keanu, thank you again for coming. It's not just the visit itself, though that means everything to her. It's that you're treating her with such genuine respect and engagement. Not everyone knows how to be with the dying." With a final warm smile, Layla departed toward the parking lot, leaving Keanu to wait for his taxi in the quiet lobby. The forgotten compliment Rita had shared through Marcy echoed in his mind. You were already someone the world needed, not because of his acting talent or his future success, but because of a simple choice to help another person when no one was looking. It struck him as quintessentially Rita, to notice the character beneath the performance, to value kindness as highly as talent. Later that night, in his hotel room, Keanu found himself unable to sleep, his mind filled with memories both recovered and newly formed. He sat by the window, looking out at the Toronto skyline. So different from the city he'd known as a teenager, yet fundamentally the same, beneath its new glass towers and redeveloped waterfront. He thought about Rita's revelation regarding her own past, the acting career set aside for love, the temporary teaching position that became a lifelong calling. About Darius Williams, the gifted student whose disappearance still haunted her. About the countless small moments of recognition and encouragement that had shaped generations of students, himself included. And about that forgotten afternoon with Samantha Chin, a minor incident he'd barely remembered, yet one Rita had carried as evidence of something essential in his character. The fact that she'd noticed, that she'd interpreted his choice as meaningful, felt like a thread connecting past and present, a confirmation that the values she had recognized and nurtured in him as a teenager had indeed become central to the man he was now. In his professional life, Keanu had developed a reputation for kindness and consideration on film sets, for learning crew members' names, for sharing his success, for treating everyone with equal respect, regardless of their position in the industry hierarchy. These weren't calculated public relations choices, but natural expressions of his character. And in Rita's observation about that long-ago afternoon, he recognized the early seedling of what had grown into an established pattern in his adult life. You were already someone the world needed. The words settled into him, not as praise to be deflected, but as a recognition to be honored. A reminder that the most meaningful impact often happens in moments when we think no one is watching, when we act from the core of who we are rather than from calculation or performance. Tomorrow he would return to Rita's room with this new understanding. Tomorrow, perhaps there would be more revelations, more connections drawn between who he had been and who he had become, more chances to express his gratitude while she could still hear it. But for tonight, he sat with the quiet power of being truly seen, not for his fame or success, but for the heart that had been present long before the world knew his name. Morning arrived with the muted light of autumn, the sun struggling to break through a layer of clouds that hung low over Lake Ontario. Keanu woke early, his sleep having been restless and filled with vivid dreams, fragments of memory and imagination intertwining, scenes from Rita's classroom merging with moments from their recent conversations. His phone chimed with a text as he was finishing breakfast, a message from the research team he'd enlisted to find Darius Williams. Promising lead, will update by end of day. A small but encouraging step toward fulfilling his promise to Rita. When he arrived at Lakeside Hospice mid-morning, he found Marcy outside room 217, her expression a mixture of professional composure and genuine concern. Rita had a difficult night, she explained in a low voice. Her heart rhythm became erratic around 3 a.m. Dr. Collins adjusted her medication, and she's stable now, but more tired than usual. Should I come back later? Keanu asked, not wanting to intrude if Rita needed uninterrupted rest. Marcy shook her head. She's been asking for you since she woke up. Just perhaps keep the visit shorter today." The unspoken message was clear. Time was growing shorter. Each visit now carried additional weight, additional significance. When Keanu entered the room, the change in Rita was immediately apparent. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, her skin having taken on the translucent quality that often accompanies advancing illness. But her eyes remained alert, and her smile when she saw him was genuine. "There you are," she said, her voice fainter than it had been the previous day, but still distinctly Rita. "I was beginning to think you'd found better company." "Impossible," Keanu replied, taking his now familiar seat beside her bed. "How are you feeling today?" "Like someone who's had better nights," she admitted, with characteristic directness. "But I'm still here, which counts for something." They talked quietly for a while, Rita asking about his hotel, whether he'd had a chance to see more of Toronto during his visit, if he'd tried the butter tarts at a bakery she'd always favored near Glendale. Small talk, but invested with the attention they'd both always given to the details that compose a life. After about 20 minutes, Rita's energy began to flag visibly. Her responses came more slowly, and her eyes would occasionally drift closed before she roused herself back to alertness. "I should let you rest," Keanu said gently. "In a moment," Rita agreed. "But first, there's something I'd like to say." She gestured for him to sit beside her again. "Something I've been thinking about." Keanu settled back into his chair, giving her his full attention. "I've been thinking about legacy," Rita said, her gaze steady despite her evident fatigue. "What we leave behind, what truly matters in the end." She reached for his hand, her skin cool against his palm. "Your visit has meant more to me than I can adequately express. Not just the reconnection, but seeing the man you've become, recognizing in you the fulfillment of what I glimpsed all those years ago." Keanu squeezed her hand gently, moved by her words but not wanting to interrupt. "I want to ask something of you, Keanu," Rita continued. "Not a favor exactly, more of a promise." "Anything," he replied, without hesitation. Rita smiled at his immediate response. "Don't agree so quickly. You haven't heard what I'm asking yet." "I trust you," he said simply. "Whatever it is, I'll do my best." She nodded, accepting his commitment. "I'm not asking you to dedicate a film to me or donate to a scholarship fund, though education could always use more support." This last was added with a hint of her familiar dry humor. "What I'm asking is more challenging, in its way." She tightened her hold on his hand slightly, emphasizing her words. "I want you to promise to keep teaching through kindness, to continue what you're already doing, using your position, your influence, to create spaces where others can grow and thrive." Keanu started to speak, but Rita gently raised her free hand to stop him. "Let me finish. There's always a scared kid somewhere, in a classroom, on a film set, in a meeting room. Someone who doesn't believe they belong, who can't see their own light. Someone like you were, or like Samantha Chen, or like countless others I've taught over the years." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, her passion for this request evident. "Show up for them, Keanu, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. That's where the most important teaching happens." The request, so characteristic of Rita in its focus on others rather than herself, touched Keanu deeply. It wasn't about preserving her name or creating a formal legacy, but about continuing a chain of positive influence that had begun long before either of them and would extend far beyond. "I promise," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll do my best to live up to that." Rita studied his face for a moment, then nodded, satisfied. "I believe you will." She released his hand and leaned back against her pillows, suddenly looking very tired. "And now, I think you're right about that rest." Keanu stood, understanding that their conversation had reached its natural conclusion for the morning. "I'll come back this evening for the reading with Layla." "I'd like that," Rita said, her eyes already beginning to close. "Assuming my cantankerous body cooperates." "Rest well," Keanu said softly. As her eyes closed, Rita murmured, Thank you for coming when I called, for remembering an old teacher after all these years. I could never forget you, Keanu replied. Everything I am as an actor, and much of who I am as a person, has roots in what you taught me. Rita's eyes flickered open one last time. You were always the most thoughtful student, she murmured, the one who listened with his whole self. As her breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, Keanu stood beside her bed for a moment longer. On impulse, he took the small notepad and pen from the bedside table and wrote a brief message. You were the first person who believed in me, and I will carry you into every scene. He placed the note where she would see it when she woke, then quietly gathered his things. At the door, he paused for a final look at his former teacher. Diminished physically by illness, yet somehow more essentially herself than ever. Her silver hair spread across the pillow, her face peaceful in sleep. The promise he had made hung in the air between them, a commitment not just to remember Rita's influence, but to extend it forward in his own life and work, to notice those who needed to be seen, to make space for voices that might otherwise go unheard, to teach through kindness, as she had taught him. In the hallway, Marcy was checking charts at the nurse's station. She looked up as Keanu approached. She's sleeping, he informed her. We had a good talk, but she tired quickly. Marcy nodded, understanding. That's the pattern now, brief periods of clarity and energy followed by longer periods of rest. Each day the ratio shifts a little more. Another gentle reminder of the timeline they were facing, another quiet acknowledgement that these visits were drawing toward their inevitable conclusion. I'll be back this evening, Keanu said. We're supposed to read plays with Layla? I'm sure she'll rally for that, Marcy replied with a smile. Reading with Leela has been the highlight of her weeks here. And now, with you joining them, she shook her head slightly, impressed. It's giving her exactly what she needs right now, not just distraction from discomfort, but meaningful engagement with what she loves most. As Keanu left the hospice, stepping into the cool autumn air, he felt both the weight and the privilege of Rita's request. It wasn't a burden, but a torch being passed, the continuation of a teaching legacy that had never been confined to classroom walls. Keep teaching through kindness. Show up for the scared kid, even when no one's watching. Simple principles, yet so profound in their potential impact. Principles Rita had embodied throughout her teaching career and was now explicitly entrusting to him. It was a legacy worth honoring, a promise he intended to keep. The call came at 5:17 a.m., pulling Keanu from a dreamless sleep. He reached for his phone, instantly alert despite the early hour. Layla's name glowed on the screen. Keanu? Her voice was steady but thick with emotion. It's Rita. She passed away about an hour ago. In her sleep. Peaceful. Though he had been preparing himself for this news, the finality of it still hit with physical force. I'll be right there, he said, already reaching for his clothes. No rush, Layla assured him. Everything's being taken care of. I just wanted you to know. Thank you for calling, he said. Are you all right? A pause, then a shaky breath. I will be. She was ready. We had a good talk last night after you left. She knew it was coming. I'll be there soon, Keanu promised before ending the call. Outside his hotel window, Toronto was still dark, the city lights twinkling against the pre-dawn sky. Rita gone. The thought seemed impossible somehow, despite the obvious trajectory of recent days. There had been such vitality in her, such presence, even as her body failed. Such engagement with life right until the end. When he arrived at Lakeside Hospice, the lobby was quieter than usual, the staff speaking in hushed tones, moving with the respectful efficiency that accompanies death in such a place. The receptionist directed him to a small private room off the main entrance, where Leela was waiting. She rose when he entered, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Without speaking, they embraced, two people connected by their love for the remarkable woman who had left them in the night. How are you holding up? Keanu asked, as they sat in the comfortable chairs provided for families in these moments. I'm okay, Layla said, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. It wasn't unexpected, and she had a good day yesterday. The reading with you, dinner with me afterward. She was tired but completely lucid, completely herself. She managed a small smile. She even corrected my grammar one last time. That sounds like Rita, Keanu said, finding comfort in this detail. Marcy was with her at the end, Layla continued. Said she just stopped breathing. No struggle, no apparent pain. The most peaceful passing she's witnessed in 15 years of hospice nursing. They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing this small mercy, that Rita's final exit had been gentle, without drama or distress. She left some instructions, Layla said finally, reaching for a manila envelope on the small table beside her. Nothing formal, her actual will is with her lawyer, but she wrote these down about a week ago and asked me to share them when the time came. She opened the envelope and withdrew a single sheet of paper covered in Rita's distinctive handwriting, more uneven than it would have been in health, but still unmistakably hers. There are practical details here about the funeral. She wanted something small, just a few former colleagues and students, no speeches longer than 3 minutes. Layla smiled faintly at this characteristic directive from beyond, and she left specific instructions about her personal items. She scanned the paper, then looked up at Keanu. She wanted you to have her collection of Shakespeare, the complete works, and her teaching notes, and… Layla paused, seeming to search for the right words. She asked to be buried with the letter you wrote her as a boy, the one you found in her keepsake box. The request caught Keanu by surprise. That Rita would choose his teenage letter as her final companion, would value those earnest, imperfect words so highly, moved him profoundly. I'd be honored to fulfill both requests, he said simply. As the morning progressed, Keanu remained at the hospice, helping Layla with the immediate arrangements that follow a death. They worked quietly, side by side, filling out necessary paperwork, meeting with the funeral home representative, beginning the process of sorting through Rita's personal belongings according to her written instructions. Mr. Patel arrived mid-morning, the retired school administrator who had first reached out to Keanu on Rita's behalf. He was a small, dignified man in his 80s, his back slightly stooped with age, but his eyes still bright and alert behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Reeves, he said, extending his hand, I'm Anand Patel. Thank you for coming when I called. It meant everything to Rita. Thank you for making the call, Keanu replied, shaking the older man's hand warmly. I'm grateful for the chance to say goodbye. Together, the three of them, Keanu, Layla, and Mr. Patel, continued the work of honoring Rita's wishes. The funeral would be held 2 days hence, a small gathering at a local chapel, followed by burial in the cemetery where her husband Gerald had been laid to rest decades earlier. Keanu quietly arranged to delay his return to Los Angeles, determined to see this final commitment through. As they sorted through Rita's belongings in room 217, Keanu came across the note he had left on her bedside table the previous day, his parting words before what neither of them had known would be their final goodbye. You were the first person who believed in me, and I will carry you into every scene. The paper had been folded and unfolded, as if Rita had read it multiple times during the night. Seeing it now, knowing she had spent her final hours with his words of gratitude beside her, brought fresh emotion to the surface. Keanu carefully tucked the note into his pocket, a private reminder of their last connection. By afternoon, most of the immediate tasks were complete. Rita's room had been cleared, her possessions sorted and packed, her final wishes documented for implementation. All that remained was to say goodbye to the space that had contained her final days, the room where connections had been renewed, where words had been shared, where a circle of influence and affection had been completed. The three of them stood in the doorway of the now empty room 2017, each lost in private reflection. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden rays. Outside, Lake Ontario stretched to the horizon, its surface rippled by a gentle breeze. She loved this view, Layla said softly. Said it reminded her that some things endure beyond our small human spans. Mr. Patel nodded. Rita always did have a keen sense of perspective. As the day drew to a close and they prepared to leave the hospice, Keanu's phone buzzed with a message from his research team. It was a brief update, but the content made his heart quicken. Confirmed. Darius Williams, located in Detroit, working as program director at Westside Community Arts Center. Full contact details attached. After all these years, Rita's lost student had been found. The timing, coming just hours after her passing, seemed almost intentional, as if some cosmic choreography had arranged for this final thread to be gathered up, this last concern of hers to be resolved. "I have news about Darius Williams," Keanu told Layla and Mr. Patel. "My team found him." Their expressions reflected his own sense of wonder at the timing, this closing of a circle that Rita herself would never know had been completed. "You should call him," Layla said after a moment. "Tell him about Rita, about what she meant to him." "I will," Keanu promised. Tonight, as they walked together toward the hospice exit, the setting sun cast long shadows across the grounds. Rita was gone, but the work of honoring her legacy was just beginning. Finding Darius was only the first step. In his pocket, Keanu's fingers closed around the folded note he'd left at Rita's bedside. His promise to carry her influence into every scene of his life going forward. A promise he intended to keep in ways that would have made her proud. Back in his hotel room that evening, Keanu sat by the window overlooking Toronto's skyline, the city lights beginning to twinkle against the deepening twilight. On the desk before him lay the information his research team had compiled on Darius Williams, a comprehensive file containing not just contact details, but a basic biography assembled from public records, news articles, and social media. The narrative that emerged was both heartbreaking and inspiring. After leaving Toronto in his teens, Darius had faced years of instability, dropping out of high school completely, experiencing brief homelessness, working a series of minimum-wage jobs across the Midwest. But a turning point had come in his mid-20s when he'd connected with a community theater program in Detroit, initially as a maintenance worker, then as a volunteer, and eventually as a teaching assistant. Now, at 49, he was the program director of the Westside Community Arts Center, running theater and creative writing workshops for at-risk youth in one of Detroit's most challenged neighborhoods. The center's website featured a photo of Darius, a tall, dignified man with close-cropped gray hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, surrounded by teenage students, their faces alive with the particular energy of creative engagement. Keanu studied the image, trying to glimpse the gifted boy Rita had described in this accomplished man. There was something in the eyes, a depth, an intensity that matched her description, something that had endured through all the intervening years and hardships. After reviewing the file one more time, Keanu reached for his phone. The call would be difficult, informing a stranger of Rita's death, explaining his own connection to her, bridging decades of separation. But he had promised Rita he would find Darius, and now that promise extended to completing the circle she had begun. He dialed the number. After 3 rings, a deep voice answered. "Westside Community Arts Center, Darius Williams speaking." "Mr. Williams?" Keanu began. "My name is Keanu Reeves. I'm calling about Rita Norwood, your former drama teacher at Glendale Middle School in Toronto." A long pause followed, then, "Ms. Norwood? After all these years?" The voice had softened, surprise evident in its tone. "How did you find me?" "It's a long story," Keanu replied, "but the short version is that Rita never forgot you. She often wondered what became of you after you left school." Another pause, then, "She remembered me? After all this time?" "She did," Keanu confirmed. "She spoke of your extraordinary talent, your natural understanding." "She did," Keanu confirmed. "She spoke of your extraordinary talent, your natural understanding of character and motivation. She regretted losing touch with you." The line went quiet again, and when Darius finally spoke, his voice was rougher than before. I always assumed she'd forgotten about me, just another kid who dropped out." "Far from it," Keanu assured him. "In fact, one of her final requests was that I try to find you, to let you know that she remembered and that she cared what happened to you." "Final request?" Darius repeated, the implication registering in his voice. "Is she—" "She passed away early this morning," Keanu said gently, peacefully, in her sleep. The sound that came through the phone was unmistakable, a sharp intake of breath, followed by what could only be a stifled sob. "I'm sorry," Darius said after a moment. "It's just, I've thought about her so many times over the years, wondered if I should try to find her, to thank her. And now it's too late." "Perhaps not entirely," Keanu suggested. "The funeral is the day after tomorrow in Toronto. It will be small, just people who were important to her. She would have wanted you there, I think." "I'll be there," Darius said without hesitation, "whatever it takes." They spoke for another 20 minutes, Keanu sharing details of his reconnection with Rita in her final days, Darius explaining the path that had led him from a troubled teenager to a committed arts educator working with vulnerable youth in Detroit. The parallel to Rita's own career was unmistakable, though Darius seemed unaware of it until Keanu pointed it out. "I never made that connection," Darius admitted, wonder in his voice. "But you're right. I'm doing for these kids exactly what she tried to do for me, using theater as a way to help them find their voices, their confidence." "Her influence lives on through you," Keanu observed, "even though you lost touch." "She gave me the only safe space I had back then," Darius said, his voice growing more reflective. "Home was chaos. School was mostly teachers who'd already written me off. But in her classroom, I felt seen, like I mattered, like I had something worth saying." The words echoed Keanu's own experience so precisely that for a moment he couldn't respond. Finally he said, "That was her gift, seeing the potential in her students, sometimes before they could see it themselves." "Exactly," Darius agreed. "I try to do that for my students now, to really see them, beyond whatever mess might be going on in their lives." They ended the call with arrangements for Darius to attend the funeral, Keanu insisting on covering his travel expenses, an offer Darius initially refused but eventually accepted with grace. As he set down his phone, Keanu felt a sense of completion. One promise to Rita fulfilled, one missing piece of her teaching legacy found and reconnected. Yet even as he acknowledged this milestone, Keanu found himself thinking beyond it. The coincidence was too profound to ignore, that Rita's lost student had been found doing work so directly parallel to her own, extending her teaching methods to another generation of vulnerable young people who needed to be truly seen. On impulse, Keanu reached for his laptop and began searching for more information about the Westside Community Arts Center. The organization's website was simple but effective, showcasing student performances, workshop activities, and community outreach efforts. A page titled "Our Impact" featured testimonials from participants and their families, statistics on improved academic outcomes for students in the program, and photos of performances in venues ranging from their converted gymnasium to local community centers. What struck Keanu most forcefully was the language used throughout, the emphasis on creating safe spaces for authentic expression, on recognizing each participant's inherent worth and potential, on using arts not just as an end in itself, but as a tool for personal transformation. The philosophy was unmistakably similar to what Rita had practiced in her classroom decades earlier. As he continued exploring, Keanu discovered that the Westside program operated on a shoestring budget, relying heavily on volunteers, donations of used equipment, and Darius's evident talent for stretching limited resources. Despite these constraints, they were clearly making a significant difference in their community, providing not just arts education but a vital haven for young people navigating difficult circumstances. An idea began to take shape in Keanu's mind, something that went beyond simply informing Darius of Rita's passing or inviting him to the funeral. Something that would honor Rita's legacy in a more tangible, continuing way. He opened a new document on his laptop and began making notes, thoughts about resources, structure, potential impact. By the time he finally went to bed in the early hours of the morning, the outline of a plan had formed, not just a gesture of remembrance, but a living continuation of Rita's teaching philosophy. The next day was consumed with funeral preparations, accompanying Layla to the chapel to finalize arrangements, helping Mr. Patel contact former colleagues and students, ensuring that Rita's specific wishes for the service were being honored. Throughout these activities, Keanu's mind continued to develop and refine the idea that had come to him the previous night. When Darius arrived from Detroit that evening, having taken an overnight bus to make the journey as quickly and economically as possible, Keanu met him at the station. Their in-person meeting was initially awkward, both men dealing with the strange circumstances of their connection. But as they shared a late dinner at a quiet restaurant near Keanu's hotel, the common ground of their experiences with Rita created a natural rapport. "I still can't believe she remembered me after all these years," Darius said, shaking his head in wonder. "That I mattered enough for her to wonder what happened to me?" "That was Rita," Keanu replied. "She saw students as whole people, not just temporary occupants of seats in her classroom. She invested in potential, even when it wasn't obvious to others. Or to ourselves," Darius added quietly. "I had no idea what I was capable of until she showed me." As they talked about Rita, about their respective journeys since her classroom, about the parallel paths that had led them both to use arts as a tool for transformation, Keanu's conviction about his emerging plan only strengthened. By the time they parted for the night, he was certain of his next steps. Tomorrow they would honor Rita's memory with the quiet, dignified funeral she had requested. And after that, they would begin building something that would carry her legacy forward, not just in memories or personal tributes, but in a living continuation of her life's work. Rita's funeral was exactly as she would have wanted, small, dignified, without excessive sentimentality, but with genuine emotion. About 30 people gathered in the chapel, former colleagues, a few ex-students who had stayed in touch, neighbors and friends who had been part of her life outside the classroom. The service was brief, as Rita had specified, readings from Shakespeare and Thornton Wilder, a few carefully chosen pieces of music, short remembrances limited to the 3 minutes she had mandated. When it was Keanu's turn to speak, he kept his words simple and direct, honoring Rita's preference for truth over performance. "Rita Norwood taught me that acting isn't about pretending," he said, looking out at the small gathering of people who had loved her in different ways. "It's about finding the truth and having the courage to share it." That lesson extended far beyond the stage or the classroom. It shaped how I approach my work, how I try to move through the world. He paused, then concluded. "She saw something in me before I could see it in myself. That kind of recognition, that kind of belief, changes lives. It certainly changed mine." After the chapel service, they proceeded to the cemetery, a peaceful place with old trees and well-tended grounds. Rita was laid to rest beside her husband Gerald, Keanu's teenage letter accompanying her as she had wished. As the simple ceremony concluded, Keanu noticed Darius standing slightly apart from the group, his expression a complex mixture of grief and something else, perhaps regret for connections not maintained, opportunities not taken. He approached him, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. It would have meant a great deal to her." Darius shook his hand firmly. "I should be thanking you for finding me, for making this possible." He looked toward the fresh grave now being covered with flowers by the other mourners. "I've spent years regretting that I never got to tell her," his voice caught, "never got to tell her what she meant to me, how she changed my life by believing I had something worth saying." "I think she knew," Keanu said gently. "Teachers often do." Later, at a small reception at Layla's apartment, Keanu found himself drawn into conversation with Mr. Patel, who had known Rita longer than anyone else present. As they stood by the window overlooking downtown Toronto, Keanu shared the idea that had been forming since his conversation with Darius. "I'm thinking about creating a foundation," he explained, "the Rita Norwood Foundation, dedicated to supporting programs that use performing arts to reach underserved youth." He hesitated, then added, "with Darius's program in Detroit as the first partner." Mr. Patel's eyes brightened with interest. That sounds like exactly the kind of memorial Rita would have wanted, something living and dynamic, not just a plaque or a scholarship. That's what I thought too, Keanu agreed. Not preserving her name in amber, but extending her methods, her philosophy, to reach more young people who need exactly what she offered. Recognition, possibility, belief, Mr. Patel nodded, understanding precisely. A chance to be truly seen. Across the room, Layla was deep in conversation with Darius, showing him old photographs of Rita from family gatherings. Their heads were bent together over the album, both smiling at some shared observation. Though they had just met, they were already connected through their mutual love for Rita and their understanding of her profound influence. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, Keanu, Layla, and Darius sat in Layla's small living room, discussing the foundation concept in greater detail. Darius had been initially surprised by Keanu's suggestion, but had quickly embraced it, recognizing both the honor it represented and the practical support it could provide for work he had been struggling to sustain with limited resources. The philosophy is what matters most, Keanu emphasized. Rita's approach to teaching, creating safe spaces where authentic expression can happen, recognizing potential that others might miss, using arts as a tool for personal and community transformation. That's exactly what we try to do at Westside, Darius confirmed. Though I've never articulated it quite so clearly, it's just what feels right, based on what I experienced in her classroom. You've been carrying her methods forward without even realizing it, Layla observed, continuing her work with the new generation. And now we can expand that impact, Keanu added. Provide sustainable funding, proper equipment, perhaps even paid positions for your staff who are currently volunteering. The conversation continued deep into the night, the foundation concept taking clearer shape with each exchange. They talked through practicalities, legal structures, governance, funding mechanisms, but always returned to the core philosophy that would guide their efforts. Rita's belief in the transformative power of being truly seen and heard. We need a motto, Layla suggested as the evening drew to a close, something that captures the essence of what Rita stood for. Without hesitation, both Keanu and Darius spoke at once. Still waters run deep. They looked at each other in surprise, then laughed at the synchronicity. It's perfect, Layla agreed. It's what she always said about students others had overlooked or underestimated, the ones who needed someone to recognize what was beneath the surface. That's what saved me, Darius admitted. Her looking past my difficult behavior, my inconsistent attendance, to see what I was capable of if given the chance. Me too, Keanu said quietly. Her recognizing something in me when I was doing my best to be invisible. In that moment of shared understanding, the Rita Norwood Foundation moved from concept to reality, not just a tribute to a beloved teacher, but a living continuation of her methods and values, a way to extend her influence to young people she would never meet, but would instantly have recognized. The following weeks saw rapid progress. Keanu's legal team established the formal structure, while Darius developed a comprehensive assessment of the Westside Community Arts Center's needs and capabilities to serve as a template for future partnerships. Layla, who had experience in nonprofit healthcare, took on the role of developing evaluation metrics to measure impact. 1 month after Rita's passing, Keanu returned to Detroit with Layla to see the Westside program firsthand. They arrived unannounced during an afternoon workshop, slipping quietly into the back of the converted gymnasium where Darius was working with a group of teenagers on scenes from August Wilson's Fences. What they witnessed was Rita's teaching philosophy in action, though in a different context and with young people facing challenges she had never encountered in her Toronto classroom. Darius moved among the students with the assured presence of a veteran educator, offering guidance without imposing his interpretation, asking questions rather than giving directions, creating space for discovery rather than demanding specific results. "What does Troy really want in this moment?" he asked a serious-faced boy of perhaps 16, who had just delivered a passionate but somewhat unfocused monologue. "Beyond the surface words, what's driving him?" The boy considered, then replied with growing insight. Respect, not just the money or the business. He wants his family to see him as someone who matters. Exactly, Darius affirmed. Now, how can you show us that need for respect through your choices, your voice, your body, your pacing? As the student began to work through the scene again with this new understanding, Keanu observed the transformation, not just in the performance itself, which gained depth and specificity, but in the young man's presence. Something was awakening, connecting, finding expression through the borrowed words of the playwright. "It's her," Leela whispered beside him, her eyes bright with emotion. "It's Aunt Rita's method, exactly as I remember it from watching her work with students." "Yes," Keanu agreed. "Different contexts, different young people, but the same essential approach, creating space for authentic voices to emerge, seeing the potential beneath the surface." In that moment, watching Darius guide these young people toward discoveries about themselves and their capabilities, Keanu felt the rightness of what they were building together. The Rita Norwood Foundation wasn't just a memorial to a beloved teacher. It was a living continuation of her work, a way of ensuring that her methods and values would continue to transform lives long after her own had ended. "Still waters run deep." The motto that would guide their efforts was already visible in action, in the quiet boy finding his voice through Troy Maxon's words, in the shy girl gaining confidence as she took on Rose's powerful confrontation scene, in the group's collective growth as they learned to truly listen to each other. Rita would have been pleased, not with the recognition of her name, but with the continuing impact of her methods, the ripple effect of her teaching philosophy, extending outward to touch lives she had never known, but would instantly have recognized as kindred spirits in the ongoing human story. 6 months after Rita's passing, Keanu found himself walking the familiar hallways of Glendale Middle School once again. Unlike his first visit, when he had quietly reconnected with his past before seeing Rita at the hospice, today the school hummed with anticipation. Colorful posters adorned the walls, announcing a special evening performance to celebrate the launch of the Rita Norwood Program for Dramatic Arts, the Foundation's first initiative at Rita's former school. Dr. Chen greeted him at the main entrance, her usual professional demeanor softened by genuine excitement. "The auditorium is almost ready," she reported as they walked toward the arts wing. "The students have been rehearsing for weeks. They can hardly believe this is happening." The transformation of Glendale's drama department had been swift and comprehensive. What had been a struggling program on the verge of elimination due to budget cuts was now thriving, with new equipment, proper staffing, and a curriculum specifically designed to reach students from all backgrounds, not just those already drawn to performance. "Enrollment in drama classes has tripled this semester," Dr. Chen continued. "Teachers in other subjects are reporting improved engagement from students who previously seemed disconnected." "Exactly as you predicted." "Not my prediction," Keanu corrected gently. "Rita's understanding. She always knew that arts education wasn't a luxury, but a fundamental tool for developing confident, connected young people." They reached the auditorium, where final preparations for the evening's invitation-only performance were underway. Lighting was being adjusted, programs arranged on a table by the entrance, last-minute costume alterations made in the wings. The familiar, controlled chaos of pre-performance, infused with the particular energy of young performers preparing for their moment on stage. Marcus Rodriguez, the young teacher who had embraced the Foundation's methodology with genuine enthusiasm, approached with a clipboard in hand. "Everything's on schedule," he reported. "The students are in the drama room for final notes and warm-ups. They're nervous but ready." "Would you like to speak with them before the performance?" Dr. Chen asked Keanu. He considered for a moment, then shook his head. "Better not. This is their moment, not mine. I don't want to add to their nerves or shift their focus." Instead, Keanu made himself useful in small ways, helping arrange chairs backstage, assisting with program distribution, staying in the background as the young performers moved through their preparations. His presence was noted, of course, excited whispers and sidelong glances following him, but the students maintained their focus, a testament to the discipline Rodriguez had instilled. As the audience began to arrive, Keanu took a position near the back of the auditorium. This was not a public event, but a special showcase for those connected to the Foundation's work. Representatives from the 3 current program sites, educators interested in the methodology, potential partners, and supporters. Layla and Darius were already seated near the front, deep in conversation with Mr. Patel and several former colleagues of Rita's. The house lights dimmed precisely at 7, and a hush fell over the auditorium. A single spotlight illuminated center stage, where Dr. Chen stood to welcome the audience and explain the evening's significance, not just a performance, but a demonstration of the Rita Norwood Foundation's first 6 months of work at Glendale and its partner sites in Detroit and Cleveland. Tonight's program features scenes, monologues, and original pieces created by student participants from all 3 locations, she explained. Some have been involved in theater for years, others have discovered their voices through this program. All have experienced the transformative power of truly being seen, of having their potential recognized and nurtured by educators who, like Rita Norwood herself, understand that still waters run deep. With these words, the stage was given over to the young performers. First came a scene from Romeo and Juliet, presented by students from the Cleveland program, approached with a freshness that made the familiar text feel newly minted. Next, 2 girls from the Toronto program, initially too shy to speak alone, found their courage in a perfectly synchronized movement piece set to Maya Angelou's Still I Rise. The showcase continued with mounting energy and emotional depth. A group from Detroit performed an original spoken word piece about their neighborhood, clear-eyed about its challenges, but ultimately hopeful about its future and their place in it. A boy who had been virtually silent in regular classes delivered a powerful monologue from August Wilson's Fences with such authenticity that several audience members wiped away tears. Throughout, Keanu observed not just the performances themselves, but their impact on the audience. The way these young voices, once overlooked or underestimated, now commanded attention and respect. This was Rita's legacy in its purest form. Not the foundation that bore her name, but the confidence and clarity these students had discovered through its programs. As the final student performer took her bow, Dr. Chen returned to the stage. "Before we conclude this evening, we have one more piece to share," she announced. A special tribute to Rita Norwood from someone whose journey as an actor began right here under her guidance. This was Keanu's cue. It had taken considerable persuasion from Leela and Darius to convince him that this personal contribution was appropriate, that it would complete the circle in a meaningful way, without detracting from the students' achievements. As he moved toward the stage, he felt a curious mixture of emotions, threads of his past and present intertwining. The last time he had performed on this stage had been as a teenager under Rita's direction. Now he returned as an established actor, yet carrying with him the same essential lessons she had imparted all those years ago. The audience's reaction to his appearance was respectfully subdued, a murmur of recognition rather than the disruption of applause. They understood, as he did, that this evening was about something larger than celebrity. Keanu took his position center stage, standing in the pool of a single spotlight, just as he had for his first performance of Hamlet's soliloquy decades earlier. He carried no script. The words remained embedded in his memory despite the passing years. To be or not to be, that is the question. As he spoke the familiar lines, Keanu wasn't performing for the audience. He was engaged in a more intimate communication with his younger self, with Rita's memory, with the essence of what she had taught him about honesty in art and in life. His delivery was not showy or theatrical, but measured and authentic, allowing the language its natural rhythm, finding the genuine questions beneath the famous phrases. The audience sat in rapt silence, witnessing not a celebrity recitation, but a deeply personal act of gratitude and remembrance. Among them, students from the foundation programs leaned forward in their seats, absorbing not just the words, but the quality of presence, the demonstration of what Rita had always emphasized, that true performance comes not from artificial technique, but from genuine connection to the material and, through it, to the audience. When Keanu finished the soliloquy, there was a moment of complete stillness in the auditorium. Then, without prompting, all the student participants rose from their seats and moved toward the stage. They arranged themselves in a semicircle behind him, each wearing the silver rippled pin that marked their participation in the Foundation's programs. The day after the showcase performance, Keanu returned to Glendale Middle School one last time before his flight back to Los Angeles. The building was quiet now, Saturday morning emptiness lending it a different character than the vibrant energy of the previous evening. He walked the familiar hallways alone, footsteps echoing on the polished floors. So much had changed since his student days. Technology in classrooms, security systems at entrances, colorful murals celebrating the school's diversity, yet something essential remained the same. The particular quality of light through the tall windows, the slight mustiness of well-used books, the sense of possibility hovering in the air of places dedicated to growth and discovery. His path took him inevitably to the drama classroom, Rita's domain for so many years, now overseen by Marcus Rodriguez. The door was unlocked, as promised, and Keanu entered the space that held so many formative memories. Like the rest of the school, the room had been updated over the decades. Modern lighting equipment now hung from the ceiling, a smartboard had replaced the old chalkboard, tablet computers sat charging in a station against one wall, but the small stage at the front remained essentially unchanged. The same wooden platform where Keanu had first performed Hamlet's soliloquy under Rita's guidance, where he had discovered the power of truth through borrowed words. He crossed to the teacher's desk where he'd left something the night before after everyone else had departed. A small wooden box sat there, crafted of polished maple with a simple silver inlay of the Foundation's ripple symbol on its lid. Inside was a letter he'd written to Rita over the past months, adding to it after each significant milestone in the Foundation's development. It wasn't meant to be read by anyone else. It was a private continuation of their conversation, a way of processing the work of extending her legacy. Beside the box lay the worn volume of Shakespeare monologues that Dr. Chen had given him from Rita's desk during his first visit back to Glendale. He'd brought both items to be permanently displayed in the drama classroom, not as museum pieces, but as working tools for future generations of students and teachers. As Keanu arranged these items on the desk, his attention was drawn to a small oak tree visible through the classroom window. It stood in the school's courtyard, not much taller than a man, its autumn leaves glowing gold. As Keanu arranged these items on the desk, his attention was drawn to a small oak tree visible through the classroom window. It stood in the school's courtyard, not much taller than a man, its autumn leaves glowing gold and crimson in the morning light. A bronze plaque at its base identified it as a memorial planted on the 6-month anniversary of Rita Norwood's passing. Keanu moved to the window for a better view. The tree was young but sturdy, well established in its place, with strong roots and branches reaching toward the sky. Like the foundation that bore Rita's name, it would continue to grow long after today's ceremonies were forgotten, a living legacy rather than a static monument. He found himself thinking of all that had transpired since that voicemail from Mr. Patel just over 6 months ago. The reconnection with Rita in her final days, the promise made at her bedside, the search for Darius Williams, the establishment of the Foundation, the hundreds of young lives now being touched by her teaching philosophy in cities across the country. Sometimes we don't realize who built the bridge we're standing on until it's almost too late to say thank you. The thought came unbidden, crystallizing his reflection on this journey. He had been fortunate enough to have that chance, to express his gratitude to Rita while she could still hear it, to acknowledge the profound influence she had exerted on his life and work. And from that belated thank you had grown something larger than either of them could have anticipated, a continuing channel for her methods and values to reach new generations. The Foundation wasn't about preserving Rita in amber, freezing her methods as if they were sacred and unchangeable. It was about extending the essential core of her teaching philosophy, the recognition of each person's inherent worth and potential, the creation of safe spaces for authentic expression, the deep listening that allows the quietest voices to be truly heard. Keanu settled on a bench beneath the young oak tree. From his pocket, he withdrew Rita's original letter, not the actual document, which was now buried with her as requested, but a photograph of it that he'd taken before returning it to the funeral home. He read the earnest words of his teenage self once more. "You were the first adult who made me feel seen, really seen, not just noticed." Everything had flowed from that simple recognition. Rita's ability to look beyond surface behavior to the potential beneath, to believe in capabilities that had yet to fully reveal themselves, to create spaces where authentic expression could flourish. Keanu placed the photograph of the letter beside him on the bench, along with the small volume of Shakespeare he'd carried throughout this journey. The gentle autumn breeze rustled the oak's leaves overhead, creating a soothing soundtrack for his final moments of reflection. He looked directly into the camera that had been unobtrusively recording this private moment, the final scene for the documentary about the Foundation's first months that would be used as a teaching tool for future educators adopting its methodology. Sometimes we don't realize who built the bridge we're standing on until it's almost too late to say thank you, he said, his voice carrying the quiet gravity of genuine emotion. But when we do, that thank you echoes forever. He paused, allowing the truth of this observation to resonate. Then, with the directness that had characterized all his communication about the Foundation, he addressed viewers directly. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Someone out there is still waiting to hear they mattered. The simplicity of this call to action belied its deeper resonance, an invitation not just to engage with content, but to recognize the power of acknowledgement, the transformative potential of seeing beyond surfaces to the depths beneath, a reminder that gratitude expressed can trigger ripples extending far beyond their point of origin. As the camera continued to record, Keanu gathered his few belongings and rose from the bench. He placed his hand briefly on the trunk of the young oak tree, a gesture of connection to what it represented, to the woman whose name it honored, to the legacy that continued to grow and evolve through the Foundation's work. Then he walked away across the courtyard, a solitary figure moving through autumn sunlight, carrying forward a promise made at a hospice bedside that had grown into something neither he nor Rita could have fully imagined during those final conversations. The camera lingered on the empty bench, the oak tree's shadow falling across it as clouds passed overhead. The photograph of the teenage letter remained visible, a reminder of where everything had begun, with a teacher who saw potential where others might have missed it, who believed in still waters running deep, who created spaces where authentic voices could emerge and flourish. Fade to black.